Hello, hello.
Hi, Cammie. Here we are again at the Confident Grief Coach Show. It is so exciting to always get together when we can and talk all things grief and about grief.
I cherish these conversations.
Me too. Me too. We've been having a lot of really cool conversations and yeah. So today, thought I'd talk a little bit. I wrote an article for LinkedIn. I think it was last week. And I use this term, I want to be careful about it, but toxic positivity and its impact on grief. So, toxic positivity, I think, is just one of those terms that it's like gets blown out of proportion. Everything's toxic positivity. It's like the pendulum swings one way or the other. And I don't see it that way, but I think for the people that are listening to us, they may understand it as far as what that is. And so I thought I have some thoughts regarding that, but I also would love to hear your thoughts regarding that and just maybe some of this examples that we've seen in our own work where or in our own personal lives and lived experiences with grief, how that shows up and what can maybe we do to help people better understand to maybe check themselves, like if they're supporting someone, check themselves at the door to make sure that what's coming out of their mouth is supportive versus cheerleader kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I would love to hear just what you shared in your article and some of the highlights from that, if you want to start with that.
Okay, well, first off, I'm dealing with I don't know if it's a cold or it's allergies. So I told you I might be sneezy. So I hope I don't do that while we're recording here. I think the article showed up for me because I said something to a client and unintentionally, and we weren't in a coaching session, but this client will tend to send me emails or text messages on what's going on within her life. She has a lot it's even beyond layering. It's like multiple grief things going on. I tell her it's like, it's like little tornadoes are just like wrapping around her. Brand new tornadoes are like showing up and then starting to just circle around her. A lot of things going on with her family in terms of health crises and that type of thing. And they're significant. We're talking end of life issues, potential end of life issues if certain care cannot be given. So it's like surrounding her dramatically. Um, then she ended up with a health event and um, ended up out of commission and has to be at home until she can have surgery in like 3 weeks. And that's tough, waiting for 3 weeks. But anyway, when she said something to me last week, and I think it had to do about her own health thing. She sent me a message and I said, "Oh, maybe resiliency is going to be your word of the year." And she, went with it or whatever. And after I got off, I thought, why would I even say that?
Mhm.
Because it was almost like, oh, resiliency. Yes, we need to be resilient. And maybe oftentimes people aren't feeling very resilient, or maybe resiliency isn't where they're at right now. Maybe it's just is resiliency living one day at a time, one moment at a time, navigating these waters, you know, turbulent waters, or is it kind of a bit of toxic positivity? So I just started like, I'm very reflective of how I be and what I say with people. So I decided to write an article about it as far as how might that not be helpful? Could be helpful, but how might that not be helpful for an individual to like, oh, you know, Resiliency, yes, yes. Ooh, you got muscles. You've got these mental muscles, and you're going to get through it. When someone might be just saying, "Oh shit, I don't want to be resilient." And I know in my own life, I've always been the strong one. And I remember my dad was very ill, and I was caring for him at home. He was dying from cancer. This was, 33, 45, 35 years ago. We're going on now next month. And my grandmother, who was a very strong woman, was on the phone with me. We would talk fairly regularly and be on the phone. And she said, "Oh, you're such a strong woman, Pat. You'll be fine." And I lost my shit with her. My dear, loving, who I adored. I went, I don't want to be strong. And I am tired of people saying that I'm so strong. And I was just like, just in mad tears. Like, why does everybody expect me to be so strong all the time? I'm not. And I don't want to be. And I don't want to be viewed that way. And the conversation kind of ended, and I had to call her back and apologize profusely because I'm sure I shocked the heck out of her. But to me, that was 35 years ago, but a great example of toxic positivity. She didn't mean it. She meant it as something that was positive about me, that
Mm.
people leaned into me for my strength, but I took it as, I'm so tired of holding this burden.
Yeah.
I don't want to be positive. I don't want people patting me on the back. I don't want people being my cheerleader. So that's where I just decided to write this article. And what's interesting is the amount of feedback, positive feedback. I mean, people are like, absolutely, this is such a good article. I mean, because it resonated for professionals who work in the grief space, right? Grief professionals, like this is like a big deal. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, so that's really kind of how it came from. And I didn't even think about my grandmother thing until we were just talking right now, but that was a prime example of, please don't tell me that everything's going to be better and
Mhm.
you got this kind of thing.
Right. I think that language shows up a lot in the grief space, especially when it comes to being thrown into these heavy, dark periods of our life where emotionally, mentally, physically, we're not well, likely, with all the stressors that are happening with grief and loss and all of the changes that come with it. So to like put that expectation on someone to like just be strong and get through it like any other typical situation, like it's not a typical situation. It's a life and death circumstance. You're going through something so extremely intense to just try to say, well, buck up or, just be strong or, they wouldn't want you to be upset or sad. They wouldn't want you to be like this, to totally shame that process of going into that dark space when really that space of like breaking down, of being vulnerable, of showing some weakness is absolutely expected. And you totally have that permission, right? Like if someone close to you just died, why wouldn't you like check out? Like for me, I was like, I didn't get out of bed for like a month. Like, and why should I? That's if you're gonna take that time and space to like be vulnerable and be in your darkness and to have all the feels and to have a sense of weakness in that regard. If you're going to, contrast strong and weak, I guess people might view that vulnerability as weakness, but really that is like the time and place to have that sense of vulnerability when you are experiencing these life-changing events.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's, and what I've noticed too with some people that I've recently been in communication with is they're doing it to themselves.
Mm.
And I kind of was doing it to myself over the last year. You know that I've been challenged with some chronic pain and that type of thing. And it's like, well, okay, wake up in the morning, look in the mirror, and just, even though right now my neck is spasming so bad, and just tell yourself, I'm going to have a great day. And I believe in affirmations. I believe in mindset and positivity breeds positivity. But there also is this time that it's just like, you know what, Pat? I look in the mirror and think it's okay that you're not jumping up and down. Your body is going through something right now, and you need to lean into it in order to heal it or find
Right.
some healing into it.
Mhm.
And I see that with people who are grieving. I know an individual who her husband is really maybe has limited time, a few weeks to maybe a month or two left. And she'll vent, and then she goes back and she apologizes for venting, like, I know I should feel happy about this or grateful for that, and it's like I'm telling her, no, you don't need to burden yourself with the shouldas. I should
Yeah.
be this, I should be that.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely can relate to like that pressure that we put on ourselves to be a certain way. And especially when we're in grief, it's like we don't have that capacity to be our normal selves. It's like having that permission to totally lean on your support systems. And we talk about the tribe and all of that as well, and how like when you're in grief and people are trying to support you, how really oftentimes the support that we need is that permission, is to be held in that melting, in that phase of like becoming a puddle and breaking down and just collapsing into the reality of what's before you, to just like dismiss that is, that you shouldn't be having that experience, and then to just try to just power through it and pretend like everything's okay. Like to me, just even just like saying that out loud, it's like, why would that be helpful? That's not helpful. Like we're allowed those moments of like be negative, then be upset about it, be angry about your situation. Like to me, that is such an important part of the process, that we need to allow that time and space to go there. And we need people in our lives to give us that safe space and that permission to be in those feels and to process through that. Otherwise, we're just shoving it down, and then it like comes out sideways another time if we
Right.
don't take care of that.
Well, and the other thing as you're talking, there's two things that popped into my mind is being a grief professional and being wanting to be that support and anchor for people. I tend to feel like I need to put the positivity spin even
Mm.
regarding my own circumstances. And I don't know, the vulnerability of being able to be vulnerable in public takes a big deal. I mean, I actually did a vulnerability post about my pain, that I've been in chronic pain. And that was a big deal because I don't want people to say, "Oh, Pat, I'm so sorry." I mean, because I am a strong person, so I don't want to have all that attention.
Like the
I want an
pity so much.
understanding. I want an understanding like, "Oh, wow, she puts on her pants the same way I do, and she goes through these wow, that's nice to know that, there's this humanness for the people that are working in this space." But I think we that are working in this space sometimes withdraw and don't share as much because we want to be the leaders kind of, to
Mhm,
show them that this is possible to have a life after, incredible loss or challenges and that type of thing. So that's one
mhm,
thing. And then you're talking about, in that when we're in that puddle and the image of my butterfly, because that's
mhm.
my image, came and I thought about that caterpillar and when it's becomes that puddle of muck, that mess, right? What is it wrapped in? It's wrapped in a cocoon. And isn't that what we want from the people around us is just be our cocoon. You don't
Yeah,
have to fix it. You don't have to say anything. Just hold us energetically or physically or whatever, just hold us.
yeah.
Like that cocoon holds And then we need to do the work. Yep. And we need to process through, but we need time to process through. A caterpillar doesn't just become that melted mush and then immediately turn into a butterfly. There's transformation, there's, metamorphosis happening within that cocoon, which we need as people who are grieving and experiencing deep challenge. That's how we can start climbing out. And the cocoon is a support, right? Because as that butterfly, what's it grabbing onto? It's grabbing on to squeeze itself out, but it's got something to hang on to, which is that cocoon that it's crawling out of, right? It's got something to stand on while it's waiting for its wings to dry. So I don't know, that just came to me. I
That's
thought, oh,
beautiful.
that was like a cool image.
Yeah, that cocoon space is so magical. That's where that alchemy and that transformation happens. That is where that like the deep grief work of like when we give ourselves that permission to tuck away from the world and to just go within and to just be with the reality of what's happening and to allow for that puddle, to allow for that fear of like, I don't know what's next. It's gonna, this change might be extremely scary, but to lean into that and to have the support that we need in order to safely go there, that's where the magic happens. And that's where we come out of these experiences a totally new person. And oftentimes that's where the resilience and the strength comes from, is by allowing that space to totally break down and be vulnerable and to turn into a pile of mush, because that's where we're allowed to welcome the fullness of who we are in our fullest expression. And it's not always going to be pretty. Like it's going to be messy and ugly sometimes, but that is like such an important part of the process. And I find myself as a leader in this space advocating for people to take that time and space and to gather the resources and the support that they need in order to go there, because we
Mhm.
can't dismiss that. We can't pretend that that's not a part of the process, because it is. So allowing for folks, giving yourself that permission and also finding other people that are going to support you and going there, to me is like the most important part of this whole grief space, because I tried to skip over that. I pretended for 10 years that I didn't need to do that. And it just caused so much extra pain, so many symptoms of how my grief was creating such chaos and turmoil in my life because I was not willing to hold myself in that space. And when we dismiss that, we are stripping ourselves of this powerful experience that we really do need when we're going through this life-changing event, whatever that may be.
Yeah. I was thinking as you're talking, like with my dad's death, I was in my early 30s and I was the strong one, right? And I never allowed myself to go into the deep. I didn't allow myself to go into the darkness, to have the dark
Mhm.
night of the soul, because I had a little kid, I had a marriage that was struggling, and I needed to work. I was a nurse. I needed to show up for my patients. And I absolutely did not allow myself. And now, when I look back over these 35 years of all the ways that most likely it was that unresolved grief that created a lot of challenges for me,
Yeah.
relationship challenges, physical challenges, emotional challenges. And I always viewed myself as the eternal optimist, right?
Mhm.
The eternal optimist. And I found that this actually happened when I really had kind of my breakthrough of my spiritual awakening, so to speak, in my 50s, early 50s, is when I allowed myself to have some of that real going deep.
Mhm.
And I still am an optimist. I believe positivity breeds positivity. I know for myself it's important for me to look at the positive aspects, but there are times now that I'm just like, I'm going within. And, if you don't like it, that's okay. Other people, but I still struggle with is that you know, you kind of judge yourself, right? Because boy, we're here to help people.
Mm.
And when
Mm.
we're not positive, it's like, oh, how can I be helping people? And I think even across, you know, Facebook and all these, it's all like positivity, positivity. And sometimes I'm like, sometimes it's okay to just say, no, it's kind of shitty.
Yeah.
What's going on in the world? What's going on in our communities? What's going on with yeah, sometimes thank you for the positivity, but what's
And I'm
bad?
going to acknowledge how shitty this is because that
Yeah,
also gets a space. We also
right.
get to see that and witness that because that's a part of the reality of this world. It's not all rainbows and butterflies all the time. Like, we will all experience suffering and grief and loss and death. And to just pretend like that's not going to happen just is silly. Like, it just creates so many more issues. But when we can choose to show up for those things and learn how to support ourselves and others in that space, that's where we come out transformed. That's where we create that strength or that resilience that's going to require us to show up for other challenges in our life because inevitably there will be more challenges that come up.
Right. And so it kind of brings me, one of our goals last year was to really stand up, this app that we have because and the app is not to be a moneymaker kind of thing. It really is to promote community for grief, people who are the grief supporters, people who are the grief professionals, because we do tend to probably lean into being more the positive face because people need us to feel like, okay, if we were Eeyore all the time, people aren't going to come to us for support, right? But we need to be able to have those times that we feel like Eeyore, and this is a community that we want to be able to lean into each other and have, like you and I do, and have an understanding that sometimes these are tough. And if we can kind of work in the deep and in the muck and be held in the cocoon of other professionals that know what, we have a similar knowledge of what's going on, we're all going to kind of show up for each other. And then we can be the cocoon for each other as we're climbing out the top, or we may be in the deep and at least know that we're surrounded by communities. So I'm putting a shameless plug in that we do have a new app out there. Um, but is it just the Confident Grief Coach app? And
Yeah.
people are interested in checking it out. There's the free portion, there's a membership portion, but we're really looking to provide that community for one another, just like what we're talking about right now from that
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great resource to find that support when we do need to be a puddle. And that happens as grief support providers. Like, I remember I had a moment of vulnerability. I was recording something, um I think a video about like a grief expression, like a movement with breath to really basically the intention was to process stored or trapped emotions and energy within the body and to allow for a safe space for that to come out. So of course, as I'm recording this, my own energy is coming up and out, and on video I break into tears and I just like sob. And I was pre-recording this, so I was able to stop and give myself that space and start over. But I went back and I witnessed myself having that moment, and I took a screenshot of me in tears, like ugly crying. And I shared that with my grief community. And the grievers in that space basically were able to point out to me how powerful that was for me as a leader in that space to show my vulnerability and to
Mhm.
model that this is very much an okay part of the process. And I got some comments like, I remember one of someone who was pretty active in the group. He said something like, I'm not trying to be a dick or anything, but it makes me feel better knowing that you have these days too. Like, you have your grief and you have your sadness and
Yeah.
your vulnerability. And I just thought how interesting that is. Like, what, you expect me not? And how powerful that actually is when we get to show up in these spaces and be totally real and honest that yes, this happens. And yes, we have so much love and support to like hold us through these moments. if we can gather the right resources and the right community to hold us in that cocoon space. And that was the exact response that I got from my community, was all of the love and the support. You know, even as a provider, I got to lean into them too when I needed it, which was kind of
Yep.
cool.
Yep. And that, kind of brings us all the way around. So the whole term toxic positivity, I always want to be very careful about that, because again, it's a balancing act. We need to be able to go and allow ourselves into the darkness and into the depths so that we can get that transformation, that metamorphosis that grief is bringing us.
Yeah.
But grief is absolutely going to attach to each one of us in some way, shape, or form, because that's part of the human existence. And positivity is important, to have a goal, to maybe see the light, but it's really that balancing act of when do we bring in that light and shine that light for someone versus just allowing them to be enveloped in the darkness for a little bit. Not for a long time. I mean, we know when, if it's too long, that's a plague that we may need to have some other interventions, but to allow people the space and cocoon them
Yeah.
as they're moving through the puddle phase.
Yeah. To sit with them in that darkness so that they're not alone in that space without trying to drag them out of it prematurely, but to have that confidence and the resources and the support to be there in the darkness, knowing that it's temporary, right? Because we know that things will shift and evolve, and especially with our emotional state of being, that energy shifts when we can witness it and give it that attention and the space that it needs to move. And
Right.
that's where I think the toxic positivity strips us of that opportunity to, like you said, to have that metamorphosis, to allow for that energy to shift and to transform. So allowing for that sacred space in that darkness to sit with someone, to sit with ourselves, and to just allow for that full expression of our grief experience is, yeah, that's really where I think the magic happens, and that darkness is powerful when we can navigate it in a smart way or in a resourceful way.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. So for everybody that's listening, what I'll do is I'll share the link to the Confident Grief Coach LinkedIn. We have our page, and if you want to read the article, that's great. The resources there, I'll put that into the show notes. But I guess what I want to say to everybody is blessings to you whatever you're at. And if you're feeling positive and good, amen. And if you're feeling like, I just feel a little shitty right now and that's okay. Find the people, and we're going to talk about that, the tribe, and finding a supportive grief community a little bit more in a future episode, but find the couple of people that can be your cocoon.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing all that, Pat, and thanks to our listeners. If you have any comments or any experiences with toxic positivity or anything that you want to share, please comment, because we would love to hear from you and to see how this is landing with you and your thoughts around this. So if you feel inspired, please reach out to us in some way, whether it's through a comment or maybe getting connected through LinkedIn or through the app or whatever it is. We are here to build that community and would love to welcome you into this space. So thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And thank you, Pat, for sharing your wisdom with us and for chatting on this channel. It's always a good time.
It is. Thank you, Cami. We'll talk to you soon. Talk to
Yep.
everybody else later. Bye-bye.
Bye.